Order. Chloe Smith to move the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs McVeigh, or forgive me, is it Dame Esther nowadays?
It isn't, but thank you very much for that sharp elevation. I hope people are listening.
Wanted to get correct before I began. Thank you very much indeed, Mrs McVeigh. May I first of all declare a relevant interest to this debate, which is that I have worked with the RNID for some time, and I'm currently in discussions with the Chairman and Chief Executive of that charity about how I can continue to support them throughout my last term in Parliament and beyond. It's not yet at a stage that I've been able to formally register it under Chapter 1 of the Code of Conduct, but I wish to declare it under Chapter 2, Section 5C, that although it would be unpaid, it is an expected future interest and clearly relevant to this debate. Mrs McVeigh, I was pleased to see the first report published in July this year under the BSL, British Sign Language Act 2022, and that's why I called for this debate about the Act and its implementation and what the report tells us about progress. First of all, let's look back to the autumn of 2021. Rose Ayling-Ellis was on our screens in Strictly Come Dancing, helping millions of mainstream viewers to see that deafness and signing is no barrier whatsoever to participation. Here in Parliament, Rosie Cooper was bringing a private member's bill to recognise British Sign Language as a language in the UK. As the then Minister for Disabled People, I was determined to work with her to achieve this, and the result of our cross-party work, deeply rooted in the deaf community, is the BSL Act 2022. Why did we need to do this? Because for decades up to that point, deaf people have suffered exclusion. Linguistic exclusion leads to social and educational exclusion. It leads to worse services and being left out in the workplace. This is wrong, and the Act is there to help put a stop to it in Britain. I was deeply proud to play my part, but it was just the start. Today's debate, Mrs McVeigh, is about implementing all of those good intentions. The journey begins to achieve better for deaf people, built on official status for a vibrant and historic language, and built on improvements in communications and public services. I would urge honourable members to look at the work of the British Deaf Association, particularly their 10-year strategic vision, rooted in consultation with the community and in learning for their own organisation, which sets out aspirations for deaf people in the UK for the next decade and beyond, following this historic legal recognition of the language. Deaf people and BSL allies alike are reaching for a more inclusive Britain, where all deaf children, young people and adults can thrive. For my own instance, Mrs McVeigh, a deaf family member inspired me to take action. My father left the work that he loved, his profession and his passion, because he could no longer hear his customers. As an MP, I've also seen how some constituents have struggled to get basic public services, such as accessible health appointments or education. So I hope that the Act will provide a clear light by which to navigate. Its symbolism is central, but its practicality is essential too. The guidance that is to be produced must improve public services, and I hope that it will also spur greater understanding and accessibility in private services and throughout society. So our task today and in years to come is to closely scrutinise the delivery of progress in promoting and facilitating BSL within and beyond government. And I'm going to ask 3 sets of questions of the Minister, who I welcome to his place. Firstly, let's look at the reporting duty and the inaugural report. This report captures data on BSL usage in government communications for the first time, sets a baseline for ministerial departments from which they can improve their promotion and facilitation of BSL in the months and years ahead. I'm glad that the government recognises that accessibility is essential in government communications and engagement. This is, of course, so that everybody should have access to important information and can engage with the government and indeed Parliament on issues that will affect them. Of course I include Parliament in this, Mrs McVeigh, and I'm heartened to have seen the efforts of interpreters here, and I understand today's debate is, of course, supported by signing provision, because that will make sure that a growing proportion of this institution's work is signed and accessible. But there's more to do, and there's more to do by government. The report reveals some important good practice and case studies, but also some concerning gaps, literally zeros on the page. What will the Minister do from now on to ensure that BSL is provided with all public announcements about policy or changes to the law, all publications like plans, strategies and consultations, and in press conferences, social media and government websites, and including at the highest levels of government, led by the Prime Minister for very significant communications that affect all citizens? I'm encouraged that the report sets out going further than the Act demanded. For example, although the Act only requires for a BSL report to be published once every 3 years, the government have said they intend to do so every 5 years, and I think that is, every year for the next 5 years, and that is welcome. It's also welcome that my successor as the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions will ask each ministerial department to produce a 5-year BSL plan, setting out how they intend to improve the use of BSL within their departments. So there will be both a 5-year plan and an annual checkpoint for each of those 5 years, and I hope this helps to drive improvement, highlight successes, and ensure accountability. So therefore today I ask the Minister if he's confident that the departments are doing this, what steps he is taking now to drive progress in this year, which we will all want to see in the report he would wish to be able to present next July. Will he, for example, be setting targets for departments? It's good to see reference to ministerial responsibility to improve BSL use. Could the Minister today give an assurance that the Ministerial Disability Champions have now met, that as promised July's report has been discussed at their meeting, and that these ministers, who have after all been asked by the Prime Minister to provide a personal lead and commitment to championing accessibility and opportunity for disabled people within their departments, have all given him clear plans for doing so? Could he also give us an update on how he plans to use his forthcoming Disability Action Plan to respond to the needs of deaf people, and what level of response he's received to the consultation, which I know has just closed early in October? Secondly, let's look at the guidance that needs to be produced. When legislating, we were clear that there must be an advisory board that will ensure that the deaf community is at the heart of the Act's effect. And I'm pleased the Minister's been able to take this forward, completing the necessary appointments and launching the board. As July's report confirms, the BSL Advisory Board will advise the government on the guidance detailed in the BSL Act and its implementation to best represent the deaf community. And this guidance will be published by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions during the next BSL reporting period. So I expect we will see it between now and next April, although it would be helpful if the Minister could also today confirm that he does intend to move the SI that I understand is required to enact Part 3 of the Act, which will allow the departments to publish this guidance. Could he also please today give the House an update on the expected contents of this guidance and tell us what priorities he has heard from the deaf community? I anticipate those priorities will span every part of public services because we know that our deaf constituents face compound problems. An example, as the National Deaf Children's Society reports, quote, access to family sign language support is currently a postcode lottery, with too many families forced to pay to learn how to communicate with their own child. Some examples from residents that I chatted with at the Norfolk Deaf Festival earlier this year. Some deaf constituents are being advised they must telephone the audiology department at one Norfolk hospital. Another had a month-long inpatient stay in another Norfolk hospital, which must have been a lonely, distressing and indeed dangerous experience because I'm told that no signing was provided. I have, of course, pursued both of those points locally. A further example from a small business in Norwich, which has used AI to provide digital BSL services. I quote, many larger enterprises do not see a commercial value in BSL translation for their customers. Some BSL-dependent banking customers got banking products using interpreters and relay services, but when it was time for changes in terms and conditions, these were offered only in written English. As a direct result, people have suffered unnecessary debt, and my business constituent was told some have lost their homes. So building on the Ministerial Disability Champions pledge to discuss the communications data arising from the Act in the first report, how will ministers go on to work together to enact effective improvement in what a person can expect as they attend a hospital or start school or look for a job or look for private goods and services.
Thank you for giving way, and congratulations on securing the debate today. She raises barriers that are faced by deaf people, quite rightly outlining some of the public service barriers. Now, a number of senior educationalists have suggested that British Sign Language be introduced as a GCSE at schools. Would she agree with me that that's something that is worth exploring further, and would she urge the Minister to take it away and look at that at a cross-governmental level about how that could support, not just breaking down barriers, but better support a lot of young people to understand the needs of deaf people and be able to communicate with them better?
My honourable and extremely well-qualified friends makes an absolutely right point. And indeed, I won't just urge the Minister to look at it, I would urge the Minister to tell us how he's getting on with doing it, because this has been a long-standing piece of work that I know the government has focused on for some time. But indeed, I think it goes actually much further than merely that one qualification in the educational system. What about the deaf children who start school at 5? What about those who are learning to speak between, let's say, 18 months and that preschool age? The time of doing a GCSE would look a very long time away from the perspective of those deaf children and their families. Let me go back to asking the Minister a further question. What data does the government collect about BSL users, and does he have plans to improve this? Could he also set out how he hopes the board will work and how it will respond to feedback? I have heard of some deep concerns about representation on that board, and the BDA that I mentioned already has articulated that a common theme emerging from the UK deaf community is a desire for more deaf leadership in BSL service delivery, for these services to be delivered by deaf BSL signers themselves, for support to enable deaf-led professional planning and budget setting on BSL issues. Could the Minister also give us an update today on progress in increasing the number of interpreters, a key issue for the deaf community? And could you give us a brief update on how access to work is being improved for deaf and other users, this being another key point heard throughout the passage of the bill and quite fundamental to the work of his department? Thirdly, Mrs McVeigh, I want to ask a final set of questions of the Minister about how the Act may be used to drive up standards via redress. We knew at the time that the BSL Act must work in tandem with existing legislation, most obviously the Equality Act 2010, which requires reasonable adjustments to be made by a wide range of people and sectors to ensure that disabled people have access equally to goods and services. What has the Minister learnt so far about how this architecture is working together? Could he perhaps share case studies today or in writing to me and indeed no doubt to the chairwoman of the APPG for Deafness, who is also here with us today, perhaps in writing to us afterwards, that show how individuals have used the BSL Act and the Equality Act to get the right standard of access or service? Could he explain how our constituents would be able to get redress in future, and how we hope that this tandem legislation will mean that we can stop indignities and injustices happening again and again to deaf people? Does he agree with charities such as the RNID that the guidance should outline the minimum standards that BSL users are entitled to as a reasonable adjustment under the Equality Act, which would force service providers to meet the needs of deaf BSL users and increase the chance of people using legal redress when they have failure? Mrs. McVeigh, thank you for allowing me to open today's debate, and I really welcome that a number of other honourable members and right honourable members have come to speak for their deaf constituents from all sections of the House and indeed all parts of the United Kingdom. We all celebrated the British Sign Language Act, and I think we would all agree that hard work is now needed and continues to be needed to ensure that it's properly implemented and that our constituents benefit from the opportunities that it presents. It is my view that only with granular focus such as this and determined attention will we see the strides that we need in the early years in education, in employment, in healthcare, in social care, in business, in the workplace, and in the community. There has been linguistic exclusion for too long, and I think we can do better.
The question is that this House has considered British Sign Language Report 2022 and implementation of the British Sign Language Act 2022. I'll be calling the front bench no later than 3:30, and then after which Chloe Smith will do a wind-up. Jim Shannon.
Madam Chair, I didn't just expect to be called right away, so I appreciate very much doing that. Thank you. I'm sort of used to always being near the end, but that's not a bad thing as long as you get the chance to speak. So can I thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute, and particularly can I thank and congratulate the Honourable Lady for Norwich North for leading the debate with the detail, the evidential base, and with the requests that are quite clear to our Minister here today. It is fantastic, as the Honourable Lady referred to, just to see the cross-party support that there is potentially in the Chamber from those who wish to contribute, as the Honourable Lady said, from all parts of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Of course, in Northern Ireland, I always bring a Northern Ireland perspective, Madam Chair, you know that, and we have a slightly different approach which I wanted to refer to. We have our own guidelines, which I will go on to speak about soon, but it's great to be here to discuss the provision of British Sign Language across this great United Kingdom. Mr Speaker brought this in some time ago, and he brought it in with a real zest to ensure that sign language was available in the Chamber for everyone, those who are watching and those who in the Chamber perhaps need the sign language as well. In Northern Ireland we have two sign languages. We have the British Sign and the Irish Sign, the BSL and the ISL. Both BSL and ISL were embraced within the Good Friday Agreement. And on March 20, 2004, the Secretary of State announced a formal recognition of BSL and ISL as languages in their own right. And that's something we welcomed. And it's very clear that caters for both sides of the community in Northern Ireland and for those who need some help. BSL is the first or the preferred language of communication of approximately 3,500 members of the deaf population of Northern Ireland, whilst approximately 1,500 use the ISL scheme. It is important that deaf people who use sign language as their first or indeed their preferred language are not looked at as a cultural or linguistic minority. Their choice to use BSL or indeed ISL as their first language should be respected, celebrated and should be encouraged. And it is in Northern Ireland. I'm very glad to say that that's the case. In March 2016, the Department for Communities back home in Northern Ireland, the Assembly, consulted on a sign language framework which contained proposals for legislation, clearly setting out the way forward back at that time. The consultation was referred to in the New Decade, New Approach Agreement in January 2020, with a commitment to introduce a sign language bill. And I say this respectfully, Madam Chair, whilst other legislation has been imposed upon Northern Ireland through Westminster, I would argue that the provision of full implementation of a sign language bill should have also been prioritised, because it's also vitally important. Sign language is something that we are all becoming aware of, and we are certainly seeing it more in society, and I'm going to give some examples of that. Most of my staff members in my office, I'm very glad to say, know the most basic of sign language. And it's important we do, because we have people who come to see us in the office, and sign language is important. I'm not smarter than anybody else, Madam Chair, I don't pretend to be, but it's about ensuring that when people come who have communication issues, that we're able as a staff to be able to respond to that in a way. And it's great having that assurance for constituents who perhaps require assistance and indeed are, and in some cases, either partially or totally deaf. It is something that should be normalised more in society, and that's what I want to see. As a society, I want to see, and also society, Madam Chair, you want to see, and indeed everyone here wants to see the same thing. And we should all try to know and understand the basics at least. The basics have certainly been taught in schools across Northern Ireland. I want to touch upon that as well. The Honourable Lady didn't, well, maybe she didn't, maybe I missed it perhaps, but I just want to say across Northern Ireland, I have 6 grandchildren, 2 granddaughters, the oldest ones, in the past have been taught some sign language in schools. I think there's an indication in the education system in Northern Ireland that where possible, because of those who have communication issues because of their deafness, are able to engage. And I think I really am quite encouraged by that, because it means that at an early age. You always want your children and your grandchildren, I suppose, Madam Chair, to have an appreciation of those who maybe don't have the same access to things. And I think it makes them a better person. So therefore, the education system in Northern Ireland, I believe, is doing the right thing. Many members here today have raised and indeed will raise concerns in relation to ensuring there are a sustainable number of interpreters in the NHS. I'm not quite sure if there is, but I think there needs to be, and I think the Honourable Lady and their contribution referred to that as well. And that's another thing, not the Minister's direct responsibility, but one that perhaps he might be able to, as Minister, give us some indication and encouragement. I've heard stories of patients who have had to rely on friends and family to interpret for them at hospital appointments. I know the nurses and the staff are under pressure, I understand it, but it's always good to have someone who has the capability of sign language. This is exacerbated, incredibly so, by the COVID pandemic, where appointments anyway were extremely limited, and there was a time you weren't allowed anyone to attend your appointment with you. That's a real issue for those 3 years or 2.5 years of COVID. There were more than 70,000 deaf people across the UK who use British Sign Language, and these things must be accommodated for in a completely normal way. There is certainly the argument that as part of a university training for nurses, and again I would put this forward to the Minister and those studying medicine, that there should be a module, there should be an opportunity within this area of study for the provision of sign language. I'm very, very keen to get the Minister's thoughts upon that as well, because I think there's a real need to do that. And I think the Honourable Lady, who set the scene so well, would also think the same. And I think everyone here would think the same. Over 200,000 people in Northern Ireland have some elements of hearing loss, and some 12 million, it's 17, almost 18% of the whole UK population, have an element of hearing loss as well. So our attitudes to sign language and provision to help those with hearing issues must be changed to become a society where it is inclusive and people hard of hearing feel comfortable in using the public service. I attended something, I was chairing a series of meetings there to do with those who have wet eye and AMD. Again, some of the things that they were putting forward is that people should perhaps maybe have a better understanding of what that means, that your singular vision is off, but you have this outside of your vision. Again, it's just an example of perhaps where we need better to understand. I conclude with this, Madam Chair. I would encourage everyone, the Minister in particular, and everyone here as well, through the implementation of the British Sign Language Report in England, the Minister has the same conversations. I know he's always keen to do so and does in the past and will do in the future with the Department of Communities in Northern Ireland at the Assembly to ensure that we have the same approach to deal with this issue. It's quite clear to me, and I'm sure it's clear to the Minister as well, that when we're having an approach on how better to make sure the British Sign Language and indeed the Irish Sign Language for those in Northern Ireland is implemented, that the approach is the same on this issue right across, and most importantly, to do as much as we can to learn as much sign language as we can. That's one of my goals that I hope to achieve, Madam Chair. It's one that everyone here will subscribe to. I think the important thing is that we recognise that there is an issue, and I'm quite sure, Madam Chair, that the Minister in his response will encourage us all that we're going in the right direction, but it would be good if we all go in the same direction together. Thank you.
Angela Richardson.
Thank you, Ms McVeigh, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. It's also a pleasure to follow on from my honourable friend, the member for Strangford. I think it might be the first time I've followed him in a debate in the 4 years that I've been in Parliament, but it's always a pleasure to be in a debate with him and listen to what he says. And I want to thank my right honourable friend, the member for Norwich North, for her excellent speech, for all the work that she's done supporting the deaf community over what is obviously many years now, and for the important questions that she laid out for the Minister. That would be good to hear some answers today, and I certainly won't be repeating those questions, but they're very important. I welcome the first British Sign Language report and its findings following royal assent of the British Sign Language Act 2022. And the annex in it, which actually shows all the BSL activity done by each ministerial department, which I think is quite important. Quite rightly, British Sign Language is recognised as a language of the United Kingdom. The UK is home to 12 million people either deaf or hard of hearing, according to the report. So we can consider it a great success that BSL users have been recognised and represented in this House. As this figure rises to 14.2 million by 2035, it's essential that we are supporting BSL users and encouraging the use of BSL so that the figure of 151,000 users can continue to increase. The report states that government communications could be improved when engaging with BSL users, especially the policy changes that have been made and the financial support packages that the Treasury are putting in place. And on that note, I think there's probably more that needs to be done in terms of how financial support is allocated at local authority level. It does seem from my conversations that there is a bit of a postcode lottery and that it's not rolled out equally across the country, and so therefore some who are deaf and hard of hearing are not able to access the same sort of financial support as other people in the country. While we must focus on the improvements we can make, I must commend the Department for Work and Pensions on the work they are doing, such as with their BSL-specific YouTube channel and the 26 videos that they have already produced in BSL. I encourage the government to continue delivering on its promises to the deaf and hard of hearing community by publishing a BSL report every year for at least the next 5 years. Making government more accessible is important, which is why I commend the work put into producing improvement plans for each ministerial department, issue internal guidance to civil servants covering best practice and things to consider when planning communication for BSL users, and providing advice on how to procure BSL translation or interpretation. This is a vital way in which those who are deaf or hard of hearing will feel they are supported by the government. A key device as work continues to tackle the issue of accessibility will certainly be the consultation of the BSL Advisory Board. Now, at the weekend, Ms McVeigh, we hosted in Guildford a BSL Fest, which was absolutely wonderful. People came from locally and from far away, members of the deaf community, the deaf-blind community, all together to celebrate British Sign Language. And I was pleased to receive one-to-one sign language training from Kathleen from Dot Sign Language. And I had the pleasure of giving a speech at the festival, the first sentences of which were entirely in sign language. Now, it is a daunting prospect for everyone to learn something new and different, but I would encourage all of my colleagues to see if they can engage and have a little bit of British Sign Language lessons from experienced professionals, because it was a heartwarming thing to do, but it was the reception from the deaf community and how they felt being addressed by not just me, the Member of Parliament, the Mayor and the lead councillor for the community in sign language before we gave our speeches. It was very heartwarming for the community to see. We've come a long way since the introduction of the Act. However, I'm sure that we agree we mustn't rest on our laurels. There is much progress to be made, and I hope that my constituents in Guildford and those deaf and hard of hearing will continue to see the benefits of our support. Thank you.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mrs McVeigh. I'm proud to be speaking today as the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Deafness and also as a patron of the Nottinghamshire Deaf Society. Can I begin by congratulating the Right Honourable Member for Norwich North on securing today's debate and for setting out so clearly the context of the British Sign Language Report 2022 and for posing a number of really important questions for the Minister. As the former Minister for Disabled People in the Department of Work and Pensions, she played a really important role in the BSL bill becoming law, and I know she once told me that she considers it her proudest achievement in government. The AGM of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Deafness is taking place next Wednesday. I very much hope some members here today will be present, and I do hope that she will become an officer of the group, and I really look forward to working with her to ensure that the needs of deaf people and those who experience hearing loss are properly represented here in Parliament and lead to real improvements for them. It is a testament to the skill and determination of my former colleague for West Lancashire, Rosie Cooper, that she was able to unite the House in support for this landmark piece of legislation, which finally set out in statute official recognition for British Sign Language. That was an important achievement. As Rosie said in her speech at the bill's second reading, I want to finally recognise BSL in statute, not just a gesture, but a law that requires positive action from the government with real progress to put deaf people on an equal footing with those of us who hear. For every deaf person, like my parents, who has been ignored, misunderstood, or even treated as unintelligent simply for relying on BSL, this recognition will be clear and a message that their language is equal and should be treated as equal. The passing of that Act was a huge moment for all the members of the BSL Act Now coalition, including RNID and the British Deaf Association and David Buxton, who'd campaigned for, and many, many other organisations beside, who'd campaigned for many, many years to secure that recognition. But recognition alone was never enough and never the intention of the bill. It was only the first step on an equally, if not more important journey towards equality for deaf people. And the BSL Act will only have succeeded if it leads to better access to communication for deaf people and real meaningful change in their life chances and experiences. And that means ensuring that government communications on new laws, on policies, on proposals and publications which affect all our lives are produced in BSL to better serve the deaf community. It means ensuring that government departments' social media posts and websites are accessible to BSL users. If deaf people who are BSL users can't access this information, they'll be denied the support, the information, the activities they need and excluded from participating fully in decision making. Now, as has already been said, Part 2 of the Act requires the Secretary of State to publish a report on the promotion and facilitation of BSL by each government department, essentially setting out how they will provide information to deaf BSL users in their communications. And it's that report that we are debating today. As RNID point out in their briefing, the lack of accessible information can lead to people feeling anxious, angry, and in some cases at risk of believing fake news if they can't access official sources. And that's why it is so disappointing to learn that 11 departments had no communications produced in BSL at all during the reporting period, and only 6 reported using BSL for publicity. As RNID set out, only the DWP and Cabinet Office made public announcements about policy or about changes to the law in BSL. And the Treasury produced no BSL publications during the cost of living crisis, leaving BSL users in the dark about what support is available for them. And the Department for Health and Social Care only had 1 consultation document translated into BSL. So much as I welcome the report, I welcome the fact that we now have transparency and we now can see what the situation is. The report, as it sets out, tells us that government is simply not doing enough, and that has to change. And I very much hope that the Minister, who I suspect is very committed to this, agrees that there is much more to do and is determined to ensure that much more happens. Now, it is welcome that the government has committed to providing annual reports annually for the next 5 years. And I do hope that next year's report will show a significant improvement in the provision of BSL content across government. And I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say about how he's going to ensure that happens and how he's going to ensure that across all government departments, there is an understanding of the fact that this needs to be prioritised, that it really matters, and that if we don't do that, that we are letting down a significant proportion of the deaf population. Now, there are some perhaps omissions from the BSL Act. So it doesn't, for example, require number 10 to report on their provision of BSL. But I would ask the Minister, will he commit to including or reporting on number 10's BSL provision? Because it would send a really clear message of leadership. And all of us will remember the deep concern and indeed anger that during the COVID pandemic there was a lack of a BSL interpreter at daily briefings, and that left BSL users without access to essential health and other information. And that was rightly challenged and brought up. I'm sure that the government has learned from it, and actually including number 10 within its reporting, I think would send a really clear message that those lessons have been learned and about the commitment to making things different in the future. Part 3 of the BSL Act requires government to produce guidance about the promotion and facilitation of the use of BSL, and the non-statutory BSL Advisory Board has a vital role in ensuring that the lived experience of deaf people is fully acknowledged and that they are a partner in the co-creation of that guidance. But I think, as the Right Honourable Member for Norwich North said, there is concern within the deaf community that they are still not sufficiently involved in departmental actions to ensure that changes truly meet the needs of BSL users. The slogan of the disability community is often "nothing about us without us," and ensuring that those with lived experience are fully not just consulted, but are partners in creating this guidance, I think would be very welcome. As has already been said, the guidance can empower the deaf community if it sets out how public services should make reasonable adjustments for deaf BSL users. If it provides those minimum standards, they will be better able to hold our public services to account and better able to seek redress when they fail to meet their needs. So setting that standard of expectation is clearly something that the guidance can and should do, and I look forward to the Minister's comments on that. For too long, BSL users have faced unacceptable barriers to their full participation in society. For too long, their voices have been unheard, their independence undermined and their opportunities limited. The BSL Act 2022 must fulfil its potential and make a real difference to the lives of deaf BSL users. And I and the All-Party Parliamentary Group will do our very best to ensure that those things happen. Thank you.
I now call the SNP spokesperson, Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for chairing this debate today. I'd like to congratulate the member for Norwich North for bringing this debate. I think it's the right time to have this, to discuss this, to ask the Minister these very pertinent questions that need answers. I'm not going to stand up and do what I often do, which is to talk about how dreadful a job the UK government are doing, because genuinely this is really good progress. There is a really good report that is highlighting the issues that there are and is making clear what needs to be done in order to get to a better place. And all governments have more to do in this regard. I do want to take the moment to celebrate the fact that next week the BSL Scotland Act will hit its 8th anniversary. It came in 2015. It was a historic act when it was passed in the Scottish Parliament, and we have had a strategy that ran from 2017 to this year. It's about to be superseded by the next strategy that has had 70 actions across 10 long-term ambitions in relation to BSL. Before I go into some of the actions that we're taking in Scotland, I want to take a moment to recognise how unique BSL is, how unique British Sign Language is. For many people, this is the first language. English is not a first language. British Sign Language is their first language for so many. And this is not a first language of people who have come from another country. This is an Indigenous language throughout these islands. And we want, in Scotland, part of the point of view of the Scottish Government has been to continue to promote and support the teaching of the use of BSL, because it is one of Scotland's vibrant Indigenous languages. We have said in Scotland that we want to make Scotland the best place in the world for a BSL user to live, work and visit. And that means that people whose first or preferred language is BSL will be fully involved in daily and public life in Scotland as active, healthy citizens, and will be able to make informed choices about every aspect of their lives. We have taken action, as I said, across 70 different actions. Not all of those we have made the progress that we would have liked to make. There is definitely significantly more to do. And as the member from Nottingham South just mentioned, we are trying to ensure that that principle of nothing about us without us is enshrined in everything that we do. When the Scottish Social Security system was replacing PIP with adult disability payment, we ensured that those people with lived experience were round that table telling us how they wanted to see the system improved. When we are consulting on the new plan, the new progress and action plan in relation to British Sign Language, we are ensuring that the deaf community are as involved as possible in that and are making the case for which action points they want to see and where they want to see improvement. We cannot make good decisions in government. No government can make good decisions if it does not have an adequate amount of lived experience informing those decisions. Some of the actions that we've taken is during the course of the COVID pandemic, for example, our former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said that she couldn't have done her job over the past few years without BSL interpreters. They were crucial in making sure that we were able to communicate properly and fully the public health messages that were so essential in the country during this time. We're also taking action in relation to schools and learning. One of the members earlier mentioned the possibility of a GCSE, I think it was. I'm not entirely sure what the equivalent is, but we do have SCQF qualifications available in British Sign Language at a number of different levels. And currently Edinburgh University is looking into a primary teaching degree that will include British Sign Language to help tackle a decline in the number of those teachers who are able to teach in British Sign Language. I think it's incredibly important that at all levels, whether it's in preschool, at school, secondary school, or in the workplace, or in public life, or even accessing shops and services, we are doing everything that we can to ensure that those people who are preferred who prefer to use BSL or who use BSL have access to this. We have ensured that all of our colleges and universities in Scotland have got a BSL plan in place. This plan is available both in English and in sign language. It is available in both. We're also ensuring that each of our local authorities, and we're not there yet with this, each of our local authorities is doing what it can to publish and to increase access to the services that they provide. We currently have 24 of Scotland's 32 local authorities, as of 2021 this was, teaching BSL in primary schools. That's 113 schools across Scotland. Obviously, we would like it to be in all 32 local authorities, and as part of the action plans, our local authorities are working towards this. So, as I say, I want to take the opportunity to celebrate this vibrant, dynamic, exciting language that so many of our constituents use, and to make clear that we're all working in the same direction in this. We are all trying to improve access to services, access to public life, access to information for users of British Sign Language. Anything that the Government Minister wants to do to work with Scotland, either to promote the good practice that they're using or to learn from the good practice that we are using in Scotland, I'm sure would be wholly welcomed by my Scottish Government ministerial colleagues in Holyrood.
pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms McVeigh. I'm grateful for the opportunity to respond on behalf of the Shadow Work and Pensions team. And I congratulate the Honourable Member for Norwich North on securing this afternoon's debate. We were opposite numbers for a time, and I remember her enthusiastic support for this Act. And when it was progressing through Parliament, and working very closely with our colleague Rosie Cooper at the time. And indeed, I remember her saying on the day the bill received its third reading, today is a momentous day, and I truly hope it will transform the lives of deaf, disabled people across the country. And it's therefore been very telling to hear some of her concerns this afternoon. And I genuinely do hope that the Minister will work with her and others to ensure that the Act really does truly deliver what was hoped for on that day. And it's really interesting to find myself sharing common ground for once. Now, I really do hope that the Minister will respond in detail to the many excellent points that have been raised this afternoon. And I'm certainly glad to see that we have BSL interpretation today, something that actually should happen across Parliament a lot more. Now, like others have said before me, I would also like to take a moment to pay tribute to the countless disabled people, friends, families, advocates, disabled people's organisations and charities who have campaigned for this Act. I had the absolute pleasure of meeting some of them along the way. And as we've already heard, the BSL Act was a major milestone for disabled deaf people in the UK, not least because it led to the BSL finally being recognised as a language. However, as has been said, the implementation of the other parts of the Act has so far been a little disappointing. The 2022 British Sign Language Report recorded shockingly low figures for the amount of BSL communication being produced by government departments. And this has important implications for co-production, something I am keen for Labour to deliver on if it wins the next general election. And it is a word that's thrown around quite frequently, but not always fully understood. Co-production means more than just engaging with or consulting the community you are working with, and in this case, the disabled, deaf and disabled communities. Proper co-production involves everyone working together on an equal basis and right from the start to come to a decision or create a service that works for all of them. And one of the most basic steps on the path to successful co-production is to ensure that all communications are accessible. And the Minister often assures me that he and his civil servants are consulting or working with disabled people on policy. And indeed, the 2022 BSL report shows that the DWP and Cabinet Office were the only departments to make public announcements about policies or changes to the law in BSL. But what is his response to the RNID's observation that the Treasury, for example, produced no BSL publication about the cost of living crisis, leaving BSL users in the dark as to what support is available to them? And number 10 is not required to report on its provision of BSL, which is something that I know the RNID and others would like to see changed. And as my honourable member for Nottingham South and also chair of the APPG on deafness said, all government communications must be in BSL, and that recognition alone is not enough. It only exceeds if everyone has equal access. And why we also need number 10 to report on this. We've got to lead from the top. Now, many of you will remember the Where is the Interpreter campaign, which did an excellent job of highlighting the fact that BSL users were excluded from the daily COVID-19 briefings. And third part of the Act is an important opportunity for the government to create guidance around reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act for BSL users. This part of the Act creates a duty for the Secretary of State to issue guidance on the promotion and facilitation of BSL. And as members will know and others have highlighted, the Equality Act 2010 obliges public authorities to provide reasonable adjustments to remove the barriers disabled people face in accessing their services. However, there is a lack of precedence concerning what constitutes a reasonable adjustment for a BSL user in this context. Now, I'd appreciate an update from the Minister on this, as I know BSL users are concerned that their adjustments are often just seen as too expensive. Now, as many members have said, including the Honourable Member for Strangford, the Honourable Member for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, about we have to make progress in terms of the GCSE for BSL. And I also wanted to touch briefly on the lack of data available on BSL users. This is something I found to be a significant issue across the DWP, so not just in this area. Without meaningful data on the number of people who use BSL and the barriers they face, it is incredibly difficult to accurately identify their access needs. At present, government data includes them in other groups such as hearing impaired and difficulty in hearing, which means there is no way to focus specifically on BSL users as a standalone group. The government has committed to reforming and standardising the data it captures on disability in both the National Disability Strategy and the Draft Disability Action Plan. So can the Minister tell us today whether this will include BSL users as a standalone group? I'll end by saying the Act was an important first step, but as this debate has shown, there is still a lot more work to do.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Ms McVeigh, and it is, of course, a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I start also by thanking my right honourable friend, the member for Norwich North, for securing this debate, but also for all of her ongoing passion around this issue, her leadership on this issue, the determination that she showed working with Rosie Cooper to deliver this landmark legislation, and for the very close interest that she shows on an ongoing basis in the government's performance around this and the wider issues affecting the deaf community, and what further steps we can take to make sure that BSL is used more readily within our society and that we have a greater availability of that, with more people with those skills able to communicate in that way. And I think it's particularly interesting, actually, that one of the key assurances that she gave during the passage of the legislation was to the Honourable Lady, the Chairman of the APPG, where she gave the assurance to the Honourable Lady, the Member for Nottingham South, during the committee stage, that the government would be open to scrutiny of the BSL Act, and that first BSL report would be published on the 31st of July this year. And we have done that, and this debate today flows on from it. And I just wanted to say that I was also very heartened to hear that beyond her time in this House, that this will be an area of interest for her and something that she will campaign passionately on, which is great to hear. And her advocacy, and I would argue advocacy of members from across the House, not just who are here today, but members more generally for this issue, I think is something that we can be proud of as a Parliament, in that all of us, on a cross-party basis, want to do the very best that we can do to ensure that there is that accessible communication for everybody in society. And I would argue it is to the government's credit that it got in behind this bill, that we worked extensively with Rosie Cooper, that we worked with the coalition, as was touched on, to shape this and to craft this legislation and to make sure that we got this right. And it is not an insignificant achievement, I might add, that it was the first private member's bill drawn 20th on the ballot to become law in over 20 years. So actually there's a little bit of parliamentary trivia there for everybody this afternoon. But actually it was a significant achievement to land a bill that was 20th in the ballot, which again I think speaks to the cross-party support that we saw, with everybody coming together from across the House to support that legislation, and of course in the other place. Now, there were many very, very good and pertinent questions that were raised during the course of the debate that I want to touch on in responding. And if I may, I'll take each of those areas in turn. As I've just alluded to, the BSL Act was warmly welcomed by the deaf community and, in particular, by the BSL Act Now campaign, whose members had worked so hard and in such a determined way to put this issue firmly on the agenda. And arguably, that passion was reflected in BSL Fest in Guildford at the weekend, and I was delighted to hear that my honourable friend, the member for Guildford, was in attendance and was part of those celebrations and part of that important community in her area, and we see that reflected in community initiatives up and down the country, and I think that that is very heartening to see as well, and it shines ever greater prominence on this, and actually why all of us as parliamentarians and why those of us in government should place real emphasis working in partnership with communities, working in partnership with charities, working in partnership with representative bodies to make sure that we continue to evolve the work that we're doing and to make sure that we are living up to the ambition that is out there in our society for BSL. And it's a privilege to stand here today to report on the progress that we are making on the BSL Act and to discuss the findings of that first BSL report. And what I will say candidly is that there is more to do. The first BSL report acts as an important baseline, I would argue, to help us understand how the government communicates vital information to a group of people with specific and distinct communication needs and to encourage us to go further. And there was a couple of points that I just wanted to touch on very early in my remarks, particularly around the judicial review of BSL at the COVID briefings during the pandemic. What I can say on that is that the judicial review found that the government was meeting its obligations under the Equality Act with regard to BSL interpretation during the COVID-19 briefings and was also compliant with the public sector equality duty. The court ruled that our policy of using on-screen British Sign Language interpreters was lawful during the pandemic. The judge ruled that it is not a legal requirement to provide an in-person BSL interpreter. There had been over 175 COVID briefings at the date of the judgment, and only 2 instances were found unlawful because BSL was not provided on screen. Our priority has always been to reach the largest possible audience with important public information, and will continue to ensure that BSL interpretation is made available where appropriate. And just specifically in relation to number 10, the reporting duty placed on the DWP Secretary of State by the Act requires them to collate and publish a report on the BSL use in the ministerial departments listed in the schedule to the Act. The intention of the 5-year plans mentioned in the BSL report is to build on the work already being done across departments who are included in that reporting duty. Number 10 and the parliamentary estate are not ministerial departments, and there is no statutory requirement on them to report on their use of BSL. However, the guidance recently published by the Government Communications Service covers all of government. I'm assured that it will help communicators across government in determining what public information should be produced in BSL in accordance with obligations under the Public Sector Equality Duty and the Equality Act 2010. And what I will say is that I'm very happy to explore this area further. And when it comes to the parliamentary estate, one thing that I would like to offer during the course of this debate is that I would be delighted to work with colleagues on a cross-party basis to see what more we can do to engage with the House authorities about what more the House authorities might be able to do. And it is very welcome that these proceedings are being covered this afternoon with that BSL interpretation. And I think we should always be striving to go further. And I'm very willing to engage and to work constructively with others to try and achieve that. Yes, of course.
I welcome that offer, and I will most certainly take him up on that. One of the things that I've struggled with as a Shadow Minister for Disabled People is actually funding BSL interpretation and where that comes from in terms of ITSA and so forth. So I think that's absolutely right. We should be leading on this. I'd just like to say one other thing in terms of number 10 and other things that around interpreters at the COVID briefings. We should always be striving to do better, and I don't think we did good enough at the time. So I think keep the ambition to continuously do better, rather than just relying on saying, oh, we weren't done by the courts apart from in 2 areas.
I think that, of course, first first part of the Honourable Lady's intervention. Delighted to work with her to try and take this forward. And I think, you know, I've sort of said consistently in the start of my remarks that I recognise that we have further distance to travel. And I am certainly not complacent when it comes to performance across the whole of government. And I would argue, it's been touched on, some of the performance around my department, the Department for Work and Pensions, is at the top of the charts. It shows the emphasis that I place on this and my ministerial colleagues in the department place on this. And, you know, I'm trying to lead by example here in making sure that I demonstrate a real commitment and a real willingness to set a standard that I want government ministers and departments across the board to follow. And it's in that spirit that we move forward with this work. Just in relation to communications across government, just to delve into that a little bit further, I couldn't be clearer, as I say, that people who use BSL as their native language should, of course, be able to access the same information as native English speakers, whether that information is about their rights and responsibilities, their ability to access support, or the opportunity to have their say on government policy development by participating in a consultation. In the last year alone, the government has ensured that BSL communications are available for deaf BSL users across subjects, as diverse as providing timely updates about cost of living payments, sharing important information about the Home Office's Tackling Domestic Abuse plan, and ensuring that BSL users are able to join in celebrating the coronation of our new King. Individual government departments have focused their BSL communications on areas of greatest importance to deaf BSL users. These include the Department for Education, publishing their Special Educational Needs and Disability and Alternative Provision Improvement Plan with BSL interpretation, the Ministry of Justice, publishing advice in BSL for victims of rape and sexual assault, and the Department for Transport, including BSL interpretation in their It's Everyone's Journey campaign. There were two areas specifically that have been raised that I just wanted to provide updates on as well in relation to that cross-government work and different parts of government communicating those messages. The first of those being around the use of BSL within health services. What I would say on that is that the Department of Health and Social Care is committed to supporting the use of BSL and has used this in communications such as, for example, to support the Down Syndrome Act, Call for Evidence. The department continues to look for further ways to promote the requirements of the BSL Act within DHSC, including sharing lessons learned from the production of the DSA Call for Evidence BSL videos, with a view to improve BSL usage, monitoring and reporting across the department. And when it comes to interpreters for GP and medical appointments, of course, under the Equality Act 2010, health and social care organisations must make reasonable adjustments to ensure that disabled people are not disadvantaged. NHS organisations and publicly funded social care providers must comply with the Accessible Information Standard to meet the communication needs of patients and carers with a disability, impairment or sensory loss. NHS England has completed the review of the AIS with the updates now within the publication approval process. And following Royal Assent to the British Sign Language Act and the legal recognition of British Sign Language as a language of England, Wales and Scotland, the Government Communications Service will promote and facilitate the use of British Sign Language in communication with the public where appropriate. And I know that colleagues in the Department of Health and Social Care keep those matters under review. But again, I want individual government departments to set a standard that we then ask our public services and our communities and our society as a whole to follow. The other area that I just wanted to provide a brief update on was in relation to the BSL GCSE, which again I know there is huge appetite for within this House and beyond. The public consultation around that has now closed. Government is analysing the results of that consultation, working up the course content, and we will make the publication of that as soon as we are able to do so. I recognise that there is a real demand for that BSL qualification, not least because of all the opportunities that that provides, particularly around educating the next generation at an early stage to have these skills that then has all of the knock-on benefits of seeing more people in our society communicating using BSL, and then hopefully going on and having really successful careers and promoting that language, encouraging others to adopt those skills and participating in our communities, in our society, in that way, which is something that I know all of us want to see and which I think is very welcome. The variety of case studies in the first BSL report do show pockets of good practice across the ministerial departments named in the schedule to the Act. Around half of policy development produced communications in BSL during the reporting period. But we know we can go further and produce more and better BSL content. It's important to note that different departments will communicate with the public, whether in BSL or otherwise, in different ways by the very nature of the fact that they have different responsibilities, different remits, different areas of interest and different communications that they need to make relevant to their specific areas of government. The departments listed in the schedule to the Act range from large operational departments like my own, the Department for Work and Pensions, which produces a large number of public communications every year, to much smaller departments and offices who may not have had occasion to produce many public communications during the reporting period. Not all ministerial departments are the same. One size does not fit all, but we do know there's room to improve, and we've committed to doing so. And with that in mind, there are 4 specific commitments recognising that need to improve that I just want to describe, because the Secretary of State has been clear about our determination to take greater action to drive forward progress with those 4 separate commitments to help us get there. First, although the BSL Act only requires for a BSL report to be published once every 3 years, I'm pleased to confirm that the Secretary of State has made a commitment to publish a BSL report every year for at least the next 5 years. Again, going to the very point about transparency, and arguably that is a tool to help aid our conversations within government around individual performance from individual departments, allowing us to continue to drive improvement, highlight successes, learn from the case studies in the first BSL report, and remain accountable to the deaf community. Second, we're committed to discuss the findings of the report at the next meeting of the Ministerial Disability Champions. Ministers who've been appointed by the Prime Minister to provide a personal lead in championing accessibility and opportunity for disabled people within their respective departments. We've already done this, and the Ministerial Disability Champions will be working with their departments to increase the use of BSL in their communications. And I'm exploring what more we can do to try and drive greater accountability within government and ownership of these actions. The Ministerial Disability Champions are specifically appointed to lead that inclusion agenda within their individual departments. But I want to explore what more we can do to try and drive greater accountability and ownership of those actions, making sure that at the forefront of everything that each department does, this inclusion agenda is right at the front of the thinking, and that we are doing these things up front, not happening as an afterthought when it comes to policy development, when it comes to legislative change, or any other announcements that we might be making. I'll gladly give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I was reflecting on his comments just a few moments ago about the differences that there are between departments and the way in which the information in the report is set out under different headings, public announcements about policy or changes to the law in BSL, publications, plans, strategies, and they're presented as a number. And actually, it might be more useful if they were presented as a proportion. So, public announcements, if we knew how many public announcements the department had made and how many of those had been also produced in BSL, we would have a better gauge of whether the department were doing well or not so well, because you would hope that when they were making important announcements, they would automatically be producing them in BSL as well as in English. So is that something that he might consider in future reporting?
Minister?
What I'll say is that I'm, of course, very happy to look at suggestions about how we can try and provide greater transparency around this performance, how we can better itemise that output that departments are making around those communications, because I genuinely want this to be a success. It is an important barometer of the inclusion agenda, getting this right, and anything that we can do to try and give confidence to people that we're getting this right, that can only be a good thing. Anything that helps to aid that transparency is something that I'm very willing to explore. So I will gladly take away that suggestion in the spirit within which it is intended. Third, building on these ongoing discussions, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions will ask each ministerial department to produce a 5-year BSL plan, setting out how they plan to improve the use of BSL within their departments. These plans will be included in the next published BSL report. And fourth, the Government Communications Service has published internal guidance for government departments which covers how to plan and then deliver British Sign Language content where it's needed to meet the needs of deaf BSL users. It's been written with the help of professionals and those with lived experience of British Sign Language. In addition to these measures, I'm pleased to confirm that officials will be working with the BSL Advisory Board to formulate the guidance specified in Section 3 of the Act. This section places a duty on the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to issue guidance promoting the facilitation and use of BSL, and it's again important to recognise that all of the members of the Advisory Board have lived experience of BSL, and actually it is important to recognise as well that we went through a thorough and proper process in making those appointments to the board. Their work will include advice for relevant government departments on best practice to support BSL users in accordance with both the Equality Act 2010, the Public Sector Equality Duty and the BSL Act 2022. It will also contain broader advice on best practice for communicating with BSL users, including case studies to illustrate the value of providing BSL interpretation in communications with the public, both in our central communications and in frontline services. And tracking back to the BSL Bill debates, we heard members recount the everyday experiences of their constituents in accessing public services. Again, let me be clear, it's not good enough to ask the hearing child of a deaf parent to relay an intimate health diagnosis or to deal with financial issues on behalf of their family. There should be a professional BSL interpreter in these circumstances to ensure dignity and respect to the deaf adult and to their family members, and I'll gladly give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. On that point that he's making, which is an incredibly important one, and it's not necessarily for his department, in discussions around those fleeing domestic abuse, they need very specialist support, and often the person who would act as their interpreter is the person who is perpetrating the abuse. So there are instances that I think departments perhaps need to step up a bit of the support for interpretation needs for those fleeing domestic abuse.
Minister.
So my honourable friend raises a point that I know all of us will want to give due care and attention and thought to, because all of us want to make sure that the very best support is available for victims of domestic abuse, to make sure that they get the care and support that they need, and that those matters are handled with the utmost sensitivity and with the right support in place to allow them to be cared for and to be supported and to have the recovery that all of us would want to see them have. That is an area that, if she would like to provide me a little bit more detail, if there's a specific that has sort of underpinned that question, again, with the benefit of the Ministerial Disability Champions, that's an area that I would be extremely willing to ask the Ministerial Disability Champion in the Home Office and in the Ministry of Justice to look at, so that they're aware of those experiences as part of their policy development when taking that agenda, that very important agenda forward. I'll gladly give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Jim Shannon.
Back to where the Honourable Lady, who leads on the as shadow spokesperson for the SNP, referred to the GSE and the need for the sign language to actually do that course. My comment and request to the Minister was along the lines that I mentioned that two my oldest grandchildren have done some rudimentary sign language at school, because that enables them, I believe, Madam Chair, to have a compassion and an understanding of those who don't. When it comes to schools, as we all know, for instance, we do rudimentary first aid. We all do that at school. We've done that at school, and it's elementary, but it does give you some understanding of the subject matter. I'm just wondering, and I'm quite happy if the Minister comes back to me, and it's not his responsibility, but it is the responsibility perhaps of the Education Minister. Could I ask perhaps that engagement will be done with the Minister? Thank you.
I'm certainly very willing to, and always grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his interventions, and I would be very willing to obtain an update for him on the work that we are doing to try and drive forward the uptake and availability of BSL and the usage of BSL within our schools. I touched on the opportunity of the BSL GCSE, and I think that is something that is very welcome and an important part of that jigsaw. But let me go away and get him an update from the Department for Education. And he also, I scribbled down on my notes, raised in the course of his remarks whether there were steps that we could take to engage with the Department for Communities in Northern Ireland on this agenda more broadly. I'm very willing to take that away and ask my officials to reach out to Department for Communities colleagues and counterparts to see what we can do in a joined-up way to try and make sure that across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, we are approaching these matters in an inclusive way, in a joined-up way, and that where we can collaborate, I think we should do that to take this important agenda forward. More needs to be done.
Just before he moves on from the subject of the guidance, could he confirm that he will be laying the SI that enables Part 3 to happen?
Minister?
My honourable friend, the former minister, is trying to draw me out early on this particular point. I will get there very, very imminently, if I may. More needs to be done to enforce the obligations outlined in the Equality Act, and government departments must strive to ensure that BSL signers have the appropriate access to their services. One of the points that was raised in the debate specifically related to data and the availability of data and the join-up around services and making sure that we understand the needs. And specifically, the question was asked about the number of responses to the Disability Action Plan. The answer to that is that we received 1,350 responses to the Disability Action Plan. We are now working through those responses, and we will come forward with a final version of that Disability Action Plan, having given proper consideration to all of that feedback. She will know that one of the areas that we consulted on was specifically around data. We also want to take forward commitments in a joined-up way, and of course, we're now in a different place in relation to the National Disability Strategy, where again there were commitments made around data, and I want there to be a proper join-up working across those two pieces of work to make sure that we go about that data work in a joined-up collective way, making sure that it has the maximalist impact when it comes to better understanding disability, when it comes to better understanding what people's needs are, and when it comes to identifying what interventions help to best support people. So we will come forward in the near future around that, and I hope that it will have some opportunity to set out the steps that we will take to try and improve that understanding and to sort of improve the quality of the data that we have as government, working in partnership with others, and colleagues across the House were right to ask about this. The BSL Advisory Board will advise the government on the guidance detailed in the BSL Act and its implementation to best represent the deaf community. This external guidance will be published by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions during the next BSL reporting period, summer 2024, with support from the Cabinet Office Disability Unit. Just in concluding, Ms McVeigh, I'd like to just say again that I'm hugely appreciative of the interest that colleagues from across the House have shown this afternoon. I am determined that we as a government must set the standard by which we ask others to follow in our society, in our communities, making sure that we deliver on this important agenda in the spirit of partnership, driving inclusion, broadening opportunity. And if there are there's a lot of questions and a lot of points raised during the course of the debate, what I will gladly do is take that away and have a look at the Hansard, and if there's any areas that I've not had the opportunity to touch on this afternoon, I will gladly provide an update on those matters in the Library of the House. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs McVeigh, and can I say it's been a pleasure for all of us to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon, and thank you for how you have helped us to have a constructive debate in what I think has been an excellent tone, which has allowed us to hear, in some cases, some new pieces of information from the Minister, for which we're very grateful, and has allowed us to draw out examples that are deeply important for our constituents, and that is what we are all here to do. So can I draw the threads together of today's debate by way of a number of thank yous. And first is to the Minister, who has just given us a great deal of his time in order to go through the span of issues that have been raised this afternoon, and we are grateful for that. I'm glad to have heard how willingly he has responded to various colleagues' requests and interests, and as the Honourable Member for Nottingham South has already said, there will be much more that the APPG and many others in Parliament will seek to do, and I'm glad to hear his attitude towards working with parliamentarians to do that. Can I secondly echo the credit that has been underlined once again in this debate to the members of the deaf community who have brought us to this place. And I want to be absolutely clear that their voices must ring out loud and clear and be heard and be used and be listened to in the work that we do. As an aside, isn't it interesting how so many of our verbs and adjectives are about hearing and speaking, and I hope that all of us can take those choices of language with the breadth that I intend them in order to be able to communicate. That is what we are here to do. But what we have in front of us is an achievement that is a huge credit and a huge credit to the deaf community and the alliance that has brought us to this point. But to be able to go further, we need to continue to work together in that manner. And it's for that reason, actually, that I mentioned in my own remarks earlier on, that an alliance like this contains both deaf people and hearing people, contains all those of us in society who want to see these kind of goals achieved. And I'm glad that we in Parliament this afternoon have had a chance to make a contribution to keeping this campaign moving forward so that we see what is needed in terms of change for deaf children, for deaf hospital patients, deaf job seekers, and many others in the examples that we have seen this afternoon. The other area of thanks then goes also to the many organisations that have made an appearance in our contributions this afternoon. And we've heard genuinely from all corners of the country. And I think it's important that we do that. I think it is vital that members of Parliament are able to seek to speak for all of their constituents. But in doing so, we need data, which we have touched on in today's debate. We need some frameworks, we need structure, which these reports give us, and we need the clear view that there will be the possibility of change and of progress ahead, which I would like to think the Minister is giving us. So in drawing today's work to a close, I'm really grateful to all those who've contributed in their many different ways to today's debate, to the prior work that took place, and that are looking ahead to what now needs to be done. If I may just ask of the Minister, who I thank again for his full response, if he would be able to return to Hansard as he has promised and pick up a number of the more granular questions that were put, then I would be very grateful to receive that in a letter, and as he wishes, I can then share that with other colleagues who were here today. In doing so, I will not leave the officials of the department out of this, who I know have worked extremely hard on this over many years, and that is part of the challenge here. That is part of the team that will push this forward in the spirit of what good government really looks like. Good, inclusive, accessible, forward-thinking, proud government for everybody in this country really looks like. So, Mrs McVeigh, thank you for bearing with me as I seek to wrap up what has been a fulsome debate. I'm very glad that we've been able to surface these issues. We may or may not return to do this on the next year of the next report, given timings of other things that may happen inside the calendar year of 2024. But we will be watching very, very closely, and the Minister can be absolutely sure that there will be people who will be hanging on every word of what he is able to do in this territory in the future. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered British Sign Language Report 2022 and implementation of the British Sign Language Act 2022. As many of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Barry.